Martinique is a beautiful island in the Caribbean, loved by tourists for its turquoise lagoons and excellent beaches. Saint Pierre is a small, quiet and very provincial town in the north of the island, with a population of about 4,500 people. But 120 years ago, everything was different. Then, Saint Pierre was one of the region's important economic and trade centres, known as Petit Paris des Antilles. The town had a population of 30,000, a commercial port, a theatre and a botanical garden. In this episode of How It Was, we talk about the eruption of Mount Pelée volcano, which in 1902 destroyed the port town of Saint Pierre. You will learn what happens when political ambition outweighs common sense. Ironically, just as the desire to hold elections by any means can cost lives, imprisonment can sometimes save from dying. The town of Saint Pierre is located on the Caribbean coast northwest of the island of Martinique, in a cozy bay surrounded by mountains. The mountains are covered with tropical forests and mangroves. Mount Pelée, which looms over the town of Saint Pierre, is a volcano, but since 1635, the year Saint Pierre was founded, the volcano rarely reminded of itself. Perhaps that is why in 1902, the authorities ignored all the warning signs, although there were plenty of them. The first alarm bells were heard in April 1902. It was then that the townspeople felt anxiety, and some even thought they were being cursed by the Lord. The inhabitants of tropical Martinique are accustomed to the lush flora and fauna surrounding them and do not faint at the sight of another giant spider or centipede. But the sudden invasion of the island by hordes of insects and other beasts was like a revived nightmare. Termites, ants, centipedes and even snakes flooded the town and its surroundings. Ants took over Guerin's sugar and rum factory in the north of the town. The horses in their stables of Saint Pierre reared up, falling into a rage. Ants and termites crawled over their legs and bit them mercilessly. The grooms doused the animals with water from buckets, trying to wash away the insects, but this did not help. In residential buildings, people tried to fight hordes of centipedes with boiling water. At some point, Saint Pierre was crowded with venomous spear-headed snakes. In one day, 50 people and about 200 domestic animals, including horses, pigs, dogs and chickens, died from snake bites. All these new neighbours came from the mountain, scurrying down the slopes. It is a pity that nobody happened to think what was the cause of their sudden escape. At the beginning of April 1902, eyewitnesses narrated that strong jets of steam escaped through fumaroles, holes or cracks near the volcano, but these reports got lost amid other news. At this time, the island was engulfed in electoral fever. On Sunday, May the 11th, parliamentary elections were to take place in all of France, of which Martinique was a part. The governor had big plans for these elections. His career could depend on the results. Therefore, the local newspapers did not spread much information about the strange things happening around Mount Pelée. In fact, their attention was devoted to campaigning for the Conservative Party friendly to the governor. On April the 23rd, ash with a strong sulphur odour began to fall on the streets of Saint Pierre. Then there was an earthquake from which dishes fell from the shelves in residential buildings. On April the 25th, it was already clearly possible to hear the noise emanating from Mount Pelée. The sounds that the mountain made were like muted explosions. A fountain of boiling water appeared near the crater. On April the 27th, more ash began to fall. It was like watching it snow. On some roads on the way to Saint Pierre, volcanic ash accumulated like drifting snow. Eyewitnesses reported the corpses of suffocated animals. On the same day, the first round of the parliamentary elections took place. In local newspapers, political advertisements and stories about candidates still occupied the front pages, and if the ashes were mentioned, the overall consensus was there's nothing to worry about. While people remained calm in the face of impending apocalypse, animals expressively showed a desire to stay away from Mount Pelée. In addition to raging snakes and insects, cattle in the pasture were bellowing, bleating, and roaring incessantly. On May the 1st, everyone living in the vicinity of Mount Pelée was awakened by a roar. Le Précieux village in the mountain's western slope was covered with ash, and the local inhabitants decided to move to Saint Pierre, thinking that it was a safer place. On May the 3rd, ash began to fall on Fort-de-France, the administrative centre of Martinique. On May the 5th, a lake of boiling water formed in the volcano's crater, overflowed, and dirty brown mud flows rushed along the mountain slopes into the valleys. Guerin plant, which survived the invasion of ants, was covered by a boiling avalanche of mud mixed with stone boulders and uprooted trees. 23 workers instantly drowned in the mud. Then the mud flow rolled into the sea, overturned a ship anchored in the port, and flooded the lower part of the town. At this point, the locals decided not to wait for instructions from the authorities and to flee. But the governor went to extremes to keep the population within the town. A commission to investigate the danger posed by Mount Pelée was created, which included only one scientist, a schoolteacher. An article appeared in the leading local newspaper which cited scientists' opinion who believed that Mount Pelée allegedly posed no more danger to the town than Vesuvius to Naples. Then the governor, Louis Mouttet, gave the order to return voters to the town by force. The fact is that the wealthy supporters of his political power had sufficient funds to escape from the island. In order to reduce the panic and prove that the danger is small, the governor and his wife personally arrived in Saint Pierre from the capital of Martinique, while their 3 children remained in Fort-de-France. The situation was becoming surreal. In his last dispatch to President Theodore Roosevelt, U.S. Consul Thomas Prentice wrote, "Refusal of elections seems to be something unthinkable. It's a nightmarish situation when it seems that no one can or does not want to face the truth." On May the 7th, the mountains seemed to calm down a little. Saint Pierre received information that the Soufriere volcano exploded on the island of St. Vincent, located 120 kilometers from Martinique. This news only reassured the townspeople. They decided that this would reduce the pressure inside the earth and their volcano would calm down. Therefore, on the night of May the 8th, everyone quietly went to bed. The morning of May the 8th was cloudless. Mount Pelée burped a tall column of steam, but otherwise nothing frightening happened. At 6:30 a.m., a passenger steamship, the Roraima, entered the port of Saint Pierre and anchored alongside the other ships. All of its decks were covered with ash. At 7:50, an explosion occurred. The surviving eyewitnesses told about a black cloud pierced with lightning flashes that flew out of the crater. A cloud of red-hot gas exploded from within the mountain and gushed down its sides at speeds over 100 miles per hour. Within minutes, Saint Pierre was completely destroyed. Its residents suffocated and burnt. Jumbled piles were all that remained of houses. Even the meter-thick stone walls were destroyed like houses of cards. Charred trees, deprived of their leaves, filled the horizon. Thousands of barrels of rum stored in the town's warehouses exploded. The burning rum ran in streams down every street and out into the sea. The only artifacts found in the ruins of Saint Pierre were half-melted glass bottles. 15 ships in the harbour were capsized by the eruption. Most of the passengers and crew members were killed. One of those who were able to tell about what they witnessed was the Italian Marino Leboffe, captain of the freighter Orsolina. On May the 2nd, he complained to local authorities, "I know nothing about Mount Pelée, but if Vesuvius were looking the way your volcano looks this morning, I'd get out of Naples." Orsolina sailed from the port of Saint Pierre on May the 7th, ignoring the ban on leaving the port, and it turned out to be the right decision. Later, this tragedy gave the name to the so-called Pelean type of eruptions. A sign of coming eruption is the growth of a lava spine, a bulge in the volcano's summit. Sooner or later, the material collapses upon itself, forming a fast-moving pyroclastic flow. A large amount of gas, dust, and ash fragments at temperatures of up to 800 degrees are blown out of the volcano's central crater at tremendous speeds. The French cruiser Suchet arrived at the site shortly after noon, but the rescue team could not reach the land. The shores were too hot. The first rescuers were able to enter the town only at about 3 p.m. The flames were still raging there. It was hard to breathe. The rescuers found a nightmarish scene, many charred bodies lying in the positions that they were caught by the explosion. Months passed before it was possible to bury all the victims. All 28,000 inhabitants of Saint Pierre, including the governor and his wife, were dead. Only 3 people survived. The first one was a young shoemaker, Léon Compère-Leander, found by rescuers in a house on the town's outskirts. Leon's body was covered with burns, but he was alive, and it was akin to a miracle. The last thing he remembered, the air around him was hot, A wool cape caught fire on a hanger. It became difficult to breathe. He hid under the table, then walked around the house a little more and lost consciousness. When he woke up, in about an hour, he was covered with burns. He stood up and walked about 6 kilometers to the village of Font-Saint-Denis. The second survivor was locked up in prison. Ludger Sibaris spent 3 days in a stone punishment cell without food or water, waiting for rescue. At some point, he lost hope and decided that this place would become his grave. The cell was tiny. There was insufficient airflow from outside. The walls were very thick, and the only window was so small and narrow that it was barely possible to put a bowl of rice into it, the usual prisoner's lunch. This window faced the side of the town opposite the volcano. Most likely, it was this circumstance that saved his life. Later, the prisoner said it became unusually dark and hot in the cell at some point in the morning. Ash fell through the window. His clothes remained intact, but the skin on his arms, legs and back was covered with deep burns. He tried not to inhale the hot air. After a couple of minutes, the temperature dropped noticeably and he was able to breathe normally. The lucky guy lived for another 28 years. He was pardoned for his crimes and later made good money performing in circuses as a doomsday survivor, recounting the horrors of the explosion. According to some reports, he was expelled from the famous Barnum and Bailey circus for a knife fight. In his own words, at one time, he ended up in the same prison cell that saved his life. The third survivor was a little girl named Havivre da Ifril, who escaped by climbing into her brother's boat and rowing to a cave where she and her friends used to play pirates. After a while, she was rescued by sailors from the cruiser Suchet. The tragedy shook the whole world. Already in the same 1902, 2 films were shot, La Catastrophe de la Martinique by Ferdinand Zecker and The Eruption of Mount Pelée by Georges Méliès. Mount Pelée continued to erupt. On May 20, 1902, a powerful new eruption took place. It killed about 2,000 people who were in Saint Pierre at that time: rescuers, soldiers, engineers, medics and sailors. On August 30th, a pyroclastic flow killed about 1,000 more people. This was the last straw for Saint Pierre's residents. If earlier many of the locals insisted on staying after this incident, they just as stubbornly sought to leave their homes. The exodus began. Mount Pelée created a kind of monument for the victims. The lava, too thick to flow, began to rise from the mouth of the volcano. A large volcanic spine grew from the crater. It grew by up to 15 meters a day. The diameter of this peculiar obelisk reached 150 meters and the height was 310 meters above the base of the crater, or 1,585 meters above sea level. Scientists call it the Needle of Pelée. After 5 months of growth, it became unstable and collapsed into a pile of rubble in March 1903, and the volcano eventually calmed down only in 1905. The place remained deserted for a long time. Then, many years later, new tiny settlements began to appear in this place. Sugarcane and cocoa plantations emerged, but there is no certainty about the revival of the greatness of the little Paris of Antilles. The old town and the old life were erased forever in a couple of seconds. Those who survived said they saw the Day of Judgment. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and ring the bell so you don't miss new episodes of How It Was.